Okay guys, this is going to be a review video. I just want you to pause at each slide, go through and try to write what you believe the answer is for each one of these arrows that you see through there, and then I'll go through and give you the answers. So go ahead and press pause. Okay, so number 1 is the lacuna. Number 2 is the central canal, also known as the Haversian canal. A is the central artery, and 2B there is the central vein. 3 is an osteocyte. Number 4 is pointing at the caniculi. Remember, the caniculi are the little eyebrows here. Number 5 is pointing to the entire circle around this entire structure, which is an osteon. So number 5 is going to be a concentric lamellae. And then number 6, surrounding the entire structure of that one area, is going to be an osteon. Okay, pause the video. Number 1 is going to be the interstitial lamellae. Number 2 is going to be an osteon. Number 3, this is going to be the circumferential lamellae. Remember, that wraps around the entire bone. Number 4 is going to be the periosteum. Remember, the periosteum has this outer layer here and an inner layer here. Remember, the inside is the one that has the osteogenic stuff, the things like osteoblasts and osteoclasts that help create bone. These little lines right through here aren't on our list, but these are our Sharpie's fibers, and that's what helps hold the periosteum to the bone. All right, number 5 is going to be the Haversian canal again, or central artery. You could go with either one. Number 6 is going to be the concentric lamellae. And then number 7, this could be a couple things. So one thing it is an example of spongy bone. Another thing too, remember, inside the bone itself, we have the endosteum, right? So there's that inner layer of bone known as the endosteum, and then there's also a spongy bone that begins around that area as well. Okay, pause the video. Okay, so number 1 is the lateral mass. Number 2 is the anterior arch. 3 is the posterior arch. Number 4 is the transverse foramen. And then number 5 is the transverse process. Just so we can help differentiate anterior from posterior arch, remember that we can see that in the front, or the anterior part, there's a very small opening between the two lateral mass, but at the posterior arch, look here, there's a very big opening. So the posterior has the much wider opening where the spinal cord is what's passing through the canal. Okay, push pause. Okay, so number 1, this is going to be the sulcus for the vertebral artery. Number 2 is going to be our posterior arch. 3 is the anterior arch. 4 is the lateral mass. 5 is the transverse foramen. 6 is the transverse process. Okay. Oh yes, and what bone is this right here? That's right, that is the first bone in our neck, right? C1, the atlas. Okay, what bone is this? The axis. Okay, pause the video, make your answer selections. Number 1 is the odontoid process, also known as the dens. Number 2 is going to be the lamina. 3 is the spinous process. Don't forget, in the cervical spine, we typically have bifid spinous process, except for C1 and C7. Number 4, this is going to be the superior articular process of C2. And then number 5 is going to be where we would see our pedicle connecting in. And let's see, that's it for that. Okay. Push pause. Okay, so number 1, this is a bifid spinous process of the cervical spine. Number 2 is the lamina. Number 3 is the superior articular process. Number 5 is going to be the uncinate processes. And then number 4 is the vertebral body. And number 6, we can see the transverse process right through there. You can't really see it, but the pedicle would be back over in this area as well too. All right, so pause the video. Okay, number 1, vertebral body. Number 2, uncinate process. Number 3, this is the pedicle. Number 4 is pointing to this area right through here. That's the transverse foramen. If you said transverse process, because it didn't have an arrow to begin with, that's fine. Number 5 is the lamina, and number 6 is the spinous process. Just for reference, the two structures we see here, 1 and 2, are both from the cervical spine, and we know that because of the transverse foramen, but we see a difference in the spinous process. Here we can see there's sort of a bifid process, here there's not. That let us know that this is going to be C7. Here we can point out also the superior articular process here, okay, just for fun. All right, here we can see this line. What is that angle if we're in the cervical spine? That's right, 45-degree angle. Good job. So that is the cervical angle of facets, which determine the amount of motion. Number one, inferior articular process. Number two is pointing to the superior articular process. And number three is pointing to the pedicle. And we've already seen these other structures. Okay? So again, what angle would we find here in this area of the spine, which is the thoracic spine? Okay? And then what will we find here, right? So 60 degrees here, right? And 90 degrees here. All right? Now I also want to point out here, we can see the inferior vertebral notch. Remember, the inferior vertebral notch is this little kind of arc structure that we see here, and then there'd be another one there at the top as well too, which would be the superior vertebral notch. We also see that there's some divots here, okay? And you have to forgive me, I know this isn't the best picture, but there's a couple of little divots here on these thoracic bones. Remember, this is the superior demifacet, and then of course here is the inferior demifacet. We find those only in the thoracic spine. Number one would be our nucleus pulposus here. Number two, annulus fibrosus. And then of course, collectively, this is the intervertebral disc. All right, go ahead, pause the video. So number one is the intervertebral foramen. Number two is our inferior articular process. Number three is our superior articular process. And number four is a transverse process. Five is the vertebral body. Six is the intervertebral disc. Number seven is the spinous process. All right. We're also going to know or learn that this area back here, it's a bump kind of right here on the back of the superior articular process. It's known as the mammillary processes. This is just a video so we can see the central canal. Okay, this is the sacral bone. Pause the video. Okay, so number one is our sacral promontory. Number two is going to be the apex of the sacrum. And number four is going to be our anterior. We could also call them ventral foramen because it's in the front. Number five is going to be the ala or sacral ala. And then number three is going to be the coccyx. Now, we also need to remember that the base of the sacrum here, if we were to draw a triangle, it kind of looks like this. So this part of the sacrum is known as the base, and then this part here is actually known as the apex because it's the point of the sacrum. Don't confuse that with coccyx because coccyx is a separate bone, and ordinarily we would actually see a disc that separates out the sacrum from the coccyx. Okay, pause the video. All right, number one is going to be our median sacral crest. Number two is going to be our intermediate sacral crest. Number three is going to be our lateral sacral crest. All right, number six, we see our sacral hiatus. And then we see at the opening where we see the sacral hiatus, there's also these two little kind of pointed projections. Those are known as cornu. We could also say they're called a horn as another name for it. So these are the sacral cornu, which is on our list, but you could also see it written as a horn. Number four is going to be the superior articular process of the sacrum. Number five, we just mentioned that one. Number seven is going to be the coccyx. And then we see those openings again here, and I didn't originally mark those, but what are those openings? Okay, that's right. Those would be the dorsal foramina because we're looking at that from the back side. Here we see a type of bone that's very densely packed, and we know that that bone is, that's right, compact bone. Now the artery that's passing through here, we can see it going through here. See the artery? This is the perforating artery. Now remember, the perforating artery is passing through the perforating canal, which is also known as Volkmann's canal. So if the artery is going across, it's a perforating artery. Remember these that are going up and down though? These guys right through there, those are our central arteries. Remember that's also known as the aversion canal, passing through there. And that's it, okay? So I believe we've hit the majority of the structures that are on our structure list for this week. Don't forget that this is not meant to replace you going to lab. This is just meant to be a supplemental. Hopefully you did well on this. I would have recommended that you actually write down what each number was so that you can actually check your spelling and make sure you spell things correctly.